this January, painting royalty Sergio Calvo asked me if I could paint a miniature for him for his upcoming Kickstarter, which is linked below. I said yes, despite my general levels of intimidation and the fact that most of the people painting miniatures for him are display painters, which I am not. I'm an army painter and are used to painting large-scale models, which I am not. I painted plenty of big minis, bloodthirsters, whatever, but large scale is different. If you check out this massive panda's head in comparison to a Space Marine one, there is no comparison at all. It's a lot bigger and it's very, very different. So despite my intimidation, I said yes, and you're going to see the journey that I embarked on. I'm going to let you know whether what you're seeing was a good idea or a bad idea. It's definitely informed how I paint for the future though, and I've learned stuff at this scale that I'll be applying at a normal / Warhammer scale, you know, my home course, the stuff that I'm used to. And I'm really, really glad that I did it. It wasn't necessarily easy. Reliving it might be slightly traumatic because there were some breakages and some other bad stuff. But anyway, let's jump in and see how it went. So straight away, something very, very obvious. This is a big boy. You can see by the comparison of sizes in my hand. So something I did right was give it a clean. This is to get any mold release agent off. And that's going to make sure that I don't repel my paint in the kind of future goes. Make sure he's dry first. So I've just dry fit everything together or blue tacked it to see how things are looking. And with that in mind, mistakes begin here. I attached various parts to the Mini. Now the bits that I pinned went really well, that's a pin, and the bits that I didn't pin were less secure. So you would assume that they would be the bits that would break if anything was going to break, and some stuff did break. So I've already mentioned my intimidation levels with this model, and for that reason I wanted to get down some kind of general ideas of light on it. I also took some pictures while it was black, and I used those for reference, but I wanted to have some colours down so I wasn't scared of a huge blank canvas before I started the important bits, which was the armour. I've been using big brushes quite a lot recently. This is an M3. And I found it really useful for blocking in the areas. This was a definite plus, I would say. It's a brush where if you press hard, it gets fat very fast because it's chubby. And being able to put down more paint was really, really useful because I'm just painting on larger areas than I would do normally. But I still had the option of that little delicate point if I was quite careful to kind of suggest a shiny edge to stuff like it was on this armor plate here. Perfect for blocking in as well. This armor plate on his shoulder was probably my favorite single piece of the miniature. Really, really fun to do. So you can see I've stuck with the one brush for quite a while, and I think I should have done this on more of the miniature. I just kind of reverted to normal brushes that I'd use on other stuff, and I think sticking with a chubby one for longer would have been a really good idea. As a top secret paint, you could use Doom Ball or something if you're looking for an equivalent though. So the dry brushing begins, and a little bit of stippling as well here. You're going to see on his bicep. The stippling went really well. The dry brushing wasn't as successful as I was expecting to be, and I think it's just being inexperienced at this scale. It's also a hand sculpted model, and that changes the shape of fur dramatically. It's a lot more realistic rather than like chunky GW fur. Okay, so good ideas. Painting his fur as volume, so a series of shapes rather than trying to paint each individual piece of fur necessarily, especially on big areas like the belly. I think I should have taken this approach and kind of committed to it more fully. But again, just a lack of experience here is probably what's held me back. Absolute failure here. Gap filling after starting painting. You know, don't ask me why. I can't give a really good reason for this. I'm using Milliput if people are interested, and my favorite kind of underappreciated X-Acto blade shape, which is really useful, this one. So semi-successful gap filling later. But yeah, again, I don't know why I did it afterwards. So I wanted to check my colours, and like I said, the armour panels were two of my favourite bits. He also comes with a pet though, and for some reason I took a really sensible approach to painting his pet's fur and didn't do that on the rest of the model. So I just kind of went step by step, put a little bit of tabby cat patterning on it, and doing things in a sensible order here, not getting them perfect at all, but doing them in a sensible order and using the dry brushing carefully and not rushing, I was really rewarded for. So I made him lighter up top, darker at the bottom, like I should have on the bear. And then once I'd established that, then I brought in the dry brushing. And that's the order that I should have done the bear in, I think. Just kind of painted it like big volumey blobs and then put some finishing touches on afterwards. Both the red and the brown are two paints that we're working on, and they've been used a lot on this model. Right, animal markings. We have a video on this coming up, and this was probably the first time I've done it in a couple of years. It went really well. I googled tabby cats and I narrowed it down to, I believe, a mackerel patterned tabby cat hair was what I googled by the end, and I found some really good references and just kind of followed those generally. Down to the small brushes here. This is an S00, I think. Kind of a preferred detail one when you need to get down to it. There we go. Should have done that on the bear. I have no idea why I didn't take this approach. I only need a couple of little neatening bits afterwards. You'll see me trying to make sure that the fur lays on top of itself. I shouldn't be having the undercolour be on top where it shouldn't, so just neatening up a few little mistakes there makes a really big difference. Right, my favourite bit of the miniature. Now, I started off with a big brush, and I think I should have probably stippled this, but I just, for some reason, because it's a new scale, I didn't think to. I felt a little bit intimidated by the piece, so I think I should have got down to base coat and then stippled, basically at this stage, stippled some shades down, stippled some highlights down and enhanced those, but this ended up taking far longer than it should have, just because I was using proper painting when I could have been skipping to finishing touches a lot quicker. All of these steps here where I'm using diluted paint, I could have just been using diluted stippling as well with a smaller brush. And then just at these steps, I could have jumped out to the proper delicate stuff. Pleased with the colours that I used, but probably not necessarily the method. Still my favourite bit of it, but just I know that I could have got there faster and had a little bit more fun with it mostly. The layer ivory coming out for the highlights has been used in a lot of different places on this mini. So these are the steps where using a brush rather than a dry brush would have made a lot of sense. And I did, but I could have got there a lot quicker, got in my general colours through stippling. That brown and that red coming out again. We're just creating a pretty diluted wash here to use for the weathering. And one of the things I did do well, I think, is allow the model to kind of paint itself with stuff like this. So making the wash wet, I'm just gently coaxing it into the areas where it would be collecting, rust that is, and given that it's soft and quite dilute, even if I make a little bit of a slip, it doesn't matter too much at this stage. The detail's sculpted so well, I can pretty much just kind of, a bit like dry brushing, the intention of where you put the brush is really important, and this worked out really nicely. I didn't feel like I was fighting the mini here at all. Perfect example just there. what I'm aiming to do here is just drop a lighter colour inside the darker base. And again, concentrating on the areas where I think rust would be collecting. So 0 is still going to hold a fair bit of paint and water, because I'm using quite a diluted mix here. Didn't feel the need to drop down just yet. The higher percentage of white and Fire Dragon I was hoping would make these poppy, but it's just not that bright, so you'll see soon that I resorted to, the strong stuff. Bold Titanium White came out and I dropped that in, and then what I've used that for is underpainting, so I'm just going to drop an orange on top of that, and the orange is going to pop out tons more because it's over a very strong white base. I've used it sparingly. Finishing touches, some shiny dots. I think generally all over the miniature I could have been a bit braver with skipping the penultimate stages of highlights and jumping to a stark final one, and pretty much got the same result or better. So after learning on his pet, I've tried to re-establish volumes again using the airbrush. Could have stippled this, I think it would have been fine, and you can see here that I've given myself an opportunity to learn on the blade, but later you'll see I just stippled the blade and it went absolutely fine. All that crap in my airbrush, dreadful. So I'm just stippling over my airbrushing. Probably smushing, you could say this was, or overbrushing. It's like a heavier dry brush application. Really useful for making quite a lot of progress pretty fast. Note that when I take my paint with my dry brush, I didn't forget how to use the dry brushes here, so I'm still really delicate with making sure there's not too much paint on them. I've not clogged it or anything. See that the kind of show of promise on that hair there? I should have carried on dry brushing and taken it a little bit lighter, I think, at least on the face or areas I'd like to draw attention to. Ignoring the lessons from his cat, unfortunately. So for me, the hand turned out better, and I think it's because I just went fairly slow on it, or paid more attention. Whereas I was trying to paint all the other areas at once. I'm not used to painting large models, and I'm used to painting smaller scale models in sections and sub-assemblies. And I think just being that far away from my comfort zone caused me to not think about what I was doing as much. Just like anything really, it felt like being a new painter again. I was a little bit lost. All right, stippling. So this went really well, and I was really pleased with this. I stopped worrying, and I had a little bit of a plan, which is much better than none, it turns out. And I stuck to stuff that I knew how to do whilst considering what scale we were at. So you see I'm using medium-sized brushes here. They make quite a lot of progress quite fast. I didn't get bogged down or over-assessed about other stuff, but I still had a general plan. You saw the airbrushing earlier, so I knew kind of where I wanted my highlights. And also this blade, it's only really got two sections. It's got the edge and it's got the main body, and I knew that I could just kind of paint a line where they separated, and that would clean a lot of things up afterwards. So I'm not worrying about being too neat or perfect or anything like that at all, and it really, really was. It's probably one of the most enjoyable parts, and it went very, very quick. You can see how fast the progress is being made. Again, look how little of my brush I dip into. I'm always quite clinical with it, and I think that's the biggest single mistake when I teach lessons for other people, is people put their brush into their paint far too aggressively and then they use it on the model far too delicately. The opposite is way better. They can take the abuse if you don't drown them in paint and water for a long, long time as well. See? Very careful. There are some pluses to GW pots, right? Maybe one, that's it. It's a small plus I'm using here if people are wondering. This is a very good infantry scale for Space Marines, stuff like that. And hopefully here you can see the benefit of stippling with glazes, which I think turned out really well actually. It's a very, very pretty kind of overall effect. It's quite forgiving because it's not smooth and perfect in the first place. There you go, more delicate applications of paint. Now, I don't think I fully sold this as metal. I highlighted on afterwards. The brush size was perfect for it. And I think I could have just basically gone for longer with the highlights and probably pushed the shades a little bit deeper and darker as well. I was very much held back with this, even though I really like how it turned out and I think it looks great. I was very much held back by it still being on the model, and that is one of the largest mistakes on this miniature, I would say. Is I'm very used to seeing large-scale painters paint stuff, paint the entire mini all together, or in very few sub-assemblies, maybe they'll leave a cloak off or something like that. And that's because they are really good at lighting and they know exactly what they want to achieve and stuff like that. I should have just painted it in bits because it's what I'm used to. There would have been some sacrifices, but I wouldn't have felt quite so lost. And it's really important for me to be able to get access to the mini at good angles. You can see here I'm kind of working around his axe. Starting to show promise on the fur by applying stuff that I learned from his pet, but again, not quite fully committing to it. The claws turned out okay with the highlights you can see there. I just Googled bears. Now using a smaller brush, I'm just glazing to exaggerate what we put on the blade. I didn't need to be this delicate here, and in fact I just ended up painting lines over it in the future. So I wanted his ropes to be kind of punchy, and I was also running out of time, so I've pre-shaded them with a white, and that's meant that I can put a colour over them, and the bits where there wasn't a white, it'll be darker, and the bits where there was, it'll be much lighter, so it was just a fast way to highlight. The colours on Sergio's are really worth checking out. His miniature turned out so beautifully. Okay, so delicate work, and I'm being really held back here and finding it hard going around the guy's head and shoulder. Probably slightly wasted time here, but I had an idea of stippling and then probably should use contrast on his axe shaft, I think. So, copper time. I googled a shiny brass Roman helmet and I zoomed in right on the picture on my phone and I just sat paint pots on different sections of it to see what color the helmet kind of broke down into. And you saw the selection that I chose. I think this went really well. I could have gone a little bit slower, I think, and maybe I could have gone slower and more carefully, but skipped out the penultimate steps to jump straight to really stark highlights like I was talking about earlier. Extra small plus still coming in useful again. Maybe you guys can let me know what you think of the verdigris that I did on this, because I'm middle pleased with it. I think it turned out all right, but I definitely wouldn't say it was perfect by a long stretch. So we've started out with a more dull desaturated one, which has gone kind of everywhere. It's a little bit diluted as well. And then what we'll do is we'll build to it being more opaque just by adding more white and light green to it, essentially. I always struggle with armor that I'm putting weathering on because I tend to kind of paint it like it's been stored the same way up that it's worn, which I guess is just easy to imagine, you know, if water was running downwards as it is on the model. But whenever you look at actual armor reference pictures, that's really not the case. I don't know if this is one of the cases though where really you should just paint it the most easily read way, because otherwise it's harder to get right. Probably I should know my limits and just paint it this way. So the reason that I'm dry brushing again over the weathering is I want to suggest those edges that have been polished, where the verdigris wouldn't be sat because it's been picked up or scraped or attacked, for all those people trying to stab his belly. If you're dry brushing, ever desaturates your piece, so if it makes it less colourful, which it can do, quick glazes are a really forgiving way to get a little bit of that colour back in there. So far too late, I realised that I should have left verdigris in the recesses more after a little bit of Googling. Just doing the highlights, and then we're going to run some more verdigris into those details, which shouldn't be too difficult. It's soon going to be time to bring out the thumb as well, I think, and fix a load of mistakes. So I mentioned this earlier, I should have just used a contrast for this. They dry a little bit flatter, so it would obscure details less and they're just stronger. I'm trying to put this in all the bits that are going to be in shadow. Again, good ideas here, but not perfect execution. This, though, worked really well. Blob it in generally and just be ready with a licked thumb. Get a wet finger in there and sort things out if you made a mistake. So I think I hit good colours here, and this bit probably shows a really good example that I could have skipped out some highlight parts at the top, because I think the bottom looks more realistic than the top did. Okay, so base coating his cloak, coat, whatever now. I wanted it to be kind of an organic, leathery, dark base, and I also wanted it to be satin. Got a little bit of Huldra blue in there. All of these paints are very far from being heavily matte, and that's going to keep my base quite smooth. You can see it's physically shiny and reflective because of the satin base, so that meant that I could hold it up to the lamp. You can see it's kind of showing me where to highlight it currently. It does make it harder to work with in some ways, but that's a really big plus when I wasn't quite sure how I should be approaching the cloak. So beginning to build it up now, and you can see that I'm pretty much following where the light is reflecting. Combination of stippling for volumes and then dry brushing to catch creases. So this part of the cloak, I followed the guidelines of where it was reflecting, this kind of bit that's swooshing out, and it turned out by far the best. I spent a little bit more time on it as well, so I mean, this really shouldn't be anything new to me, should it? The areas that I've thought about the most or followed reference on and not rushed, they've turned out the best, which is just the basics of dry brushing really, isn't it? Just really built up that kind of old, worn texture that I was very, very pleased with. And we snapped his weapons off. We snapped everything off to aid our access miles easier, and I did it far too late. It's much easier to get these angles and feel steady when you can get your brush in without obstructions in the way. Time to shiny up his coat a little bit, literally. So I wanted it to look worn, but like it had been fancy once. Also, I didn't quite know what to do with this trim, so I went for some little lines to make it look like it had shiny gold thread on it. Again, this is the same 00 that I've used for all of the video, and it's my favorite and only really main one that I'm using currently. It's getting very old and tired though. You can see it's not got as much of a point as like a tiny little flat end like a spade. Really been enjoying using it. Finishing touches now, I wanted another dot of red low left on the model when you're looking at it, and this is the only way that I could think of. All right, that is it. Turned out pretty well, quite scary. Definitely quite scary, but I really enjoyed it, and there's a lot of learning points for me, especially skipping and not obsessing about penultimate highlight steps and jumping to a final one and trying to draw it. I think is something I'm going to try a lot more in the future. Really enjoyed this. Let me know if it was useful. Have you ever painted a large scale miniature? Not a big mini like a Warhammer tank, but one that is done at a larger scale. I think it was, we asked on Instagram, it's roughly 50-50. I'd absolutely recommend giving it a go. Maybe just pick up a bust or something unintimidating. And you can always paint a Warhammer bust. We did that with the Stormcast Eternals Dragon a while back. And we got a little list of suggestions at the bottom of that video in the pinned comment of other Warhammer kits that come with what feels like a large scale bust. So you could approach something like that as a first one. All right, we'll catch you in the next video, which is probably gonna be how to do animal markings. I've had a little bit of practice. I'm gonna try some harder stuff like tiger fur, and we'll give you some tips so you can approach it on your minis. It is the easiest freehand. So just hold that in mind, nothing to be scared of. Animal markings is where it's at, and I might try like a shark one or a slug one as well. Catch you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to check out Sergio's Kickstarter below.